It's me again, RC Mull here, and I apologize for my somewhat damp appearance, but I did have a nice warm bath before I came online to read this. Sometimes you have a bath before you go to bed or you read your bedtime story, so all part of the process. So, very short chapter tonight. So, without further ado, the rest of her first day passed without further note, aside from a restless night in her new room in the servants' quarters due to the unfamiliarity of the room and a rat scratching in one wall. The morning of the second day, she entered the room of the lady of the house, intending to make up the fire and tidy up. When she entered the bedroom of the lady's suite, she found the bed occupied, Mrs. Montague awake and alert beneath the covers. Fiona took a step back. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but I can come back when you're up and about." Mrs. Montague propped herself on one elbow, holding the covers before her with her other hand. "No, no, you needn't go away on my account. I don't want your work to back up." Fiona stepped back into the room. "That's kind of you, ma'am." Tending Mr. Montague's chambers passed without incident, as the master had already risen and, according to one of the footmen, departed to tour one of the mills which he part owned. Later that day, with her tasks above stairs finished, Fiona descended to the ground floor to sweep the hallway leading from the stairs to the common area. She noted a footprint in the dust before the locked door. Sprinkling some sawdust from her pail onto the steps, she swept it clear. As the servants had their supper later that evening, after dinner had been served upstairs, Garson approached Fiona at her place at the foot of the table. "Mrs. Conneen, the master wishes to speak to you above stairs." Bridget's starting off on the wrong foot. One of the kitchen boys, a lean fellow in his mid-teens with black hair, adjusted. Adele darted a sore look at him. "Hold your tongue, Sharky." Ignoring this exchange, but relieved at Adele's intervention, Fiona rose and followed the footman upstairs to the drawing room. Mr. and Mrs. Montague sat there apart, she by the fire, he with a book in hand, sitting in a large mahogany armchair, the heads of snarling wolves supporting the armrests. "Mrs. Conneen, Mrs. Montague tells me you are settling in well," Mr. Montague said. "Indeed, sir," Fiona said, uncertain as to what brought her here. "But if I recall, according to Mrs. Hawker, you were ordered not to sweep in a certain place. Am I correct?" Mrs. Montague, Avril, looked up from her embroidery, glancing from Fiona to her husband, then looked back to her work. "Yes, sir." "And what spot were you informed not to sweep?" "He speaks to me as if I were a child," Fiona thought. Out loud she replied, "I was ordered not to sweep the steps before the door to the lower cellar." "Mrs. Conneen, I would rather you followed that order to the letter and refrained from further failures." "Begging your pardon, sir, but I thought sweeping the floors in the house was part of my regular duties," Fiona asked. He looked her in the eye, his cold gray ones hard. "Your duties involve carrying out your orders as they are given, not asking questions about them." She prayed an Ave in her mind, then replied evenly, "As you wish, sir." But her heart burned within her. This man has a devil, either from hell or of his own making, she thought. "You are excused," he said, returning back to the book laid open on his desk. She quit the room as ordered, but she felt Avril watching her depart. Things are starting to heat up a little bit, but it starts to get really interesting in the next chapters. I can assure you that. But I like doing slow burns. It's just build it up so that makes it, when you get to the spooks, it's more, what was that? Build it up and then pull it back, and then build up some more and pull it back. So, but I did have a lot of fun writing this one. I wound up doing a lot of heavy research, well, maybe not heavy research, but reading a lot of articles and whatnot about Irish women working as domestics in households in the 19th century, and the guff that they had to go through. Besides the hard work that they had to do, they had to put up with employers who weren't always the nicest people, and people who would do things like getting your title wrong. Like, technically, our lady our lady maid here is a miss because she's not married. She never got married. It's part of her backstory. But they all insist on addressing her as Mrs. because she's slightly older. She's somewhere in her 40s. Like, she's not a self-insert, but there's some aspects of her that are based on myself, and there's some aspects that are based on 2 or 3 friends of mine. So a lot of my characters have a tendency to be composites of people that I know, and it's not necessarily the whole person, but this aspect from this person and that aspect from that person. So they're kind of like those jumbly, detective, make a face kit things, for, creating mugshots of people. So, I never use a person whole cloth because that would be mean, especially because I write horror. But I do draw inspiration from people that I actually know, including myself. Know thyself. Anyway, and one other thing that kind of crept in was she gets addressed often as Bridget, even though that isn't her actual name. And that was kind of, that unfortunately was a thing in 19th century parlance, if you will, addressing Irish women as Bridget, whether or not that was their actual name. And it was kind of mean, it's like these, it's a case of, was it racism, ethnicism, just people not being awesome to other people, we'll say. So, and I threw that in there because it wasn't, unfortunately it was a thing back then, and I wanted to strive for a certain amount of accuracy, even though that accuracy involves things that are quite ugly, or ugly. We're just going to say it's ugly. It might not be the worst ugly, but it's still ugly. It's still, people not being awesome to each other, people not being excellent to each other. Be excellent to each other. Love that philosophy. Anyway, but until tomorrow night, you folks have a good evening, have a good sleep, and you all keep it creepy.